November 14th, 1943, Fort Benning, Georgia. The air inside the corrugated metal Quonset hut is thick with the smell of stale tobacco and unwashed wool. Outside, the Georgia pine forests are baking in the late autumn sun. But inside, 200 men of the replacement draft sit in darkness. The only light comes from the jittery, dust-filled beam of a 16mm projector, cutting through the cigarette smoke to illuminate a white canvas screen. Private First Class. Eddie Miller shifts uncomfortably on the hard wooden bench. He is 19 years old, from a farm outside Topeka, and he believes in the United States Army with the same fervor he believes in the Bible. On the screen, a black and white instructional film flickers to life. The title card reads, "Infantry Weapons and Their Effects." The narrator's voice is calm, authoritative, and distinctly American. He sounds like a father explaining a math problem to a slow child. The footage cuts to a captured German machine gun, the Maschinengewehr 42. It sits on a tripod, looking angular and menacing. "Now, men," the narrator booms, "you've heard stories about the German MG42. You've heard it fires fast. You've heard it's a killer." Miller watches as the soldier on screen fires a burst. The sound is a rapid, high-pitched blur. Brrrt, totally unlike the slow, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the American .30 caliber Browning. The narrator chuckles darkly. "But don't let that noise fool you. The German gun has a bark that is far worse than its bite." A collective ripple of relief moves through the room. Miller exchanges a glance with the soldier next to him. They grin. "Because of its excessive rate of fire," the narrator continues, pointing to a diagram, "the gun vibrates uncontrollably. It is inaccurate. It overheats rapidly. It wastes ammunition. While the German is changing his melted barrel, that is when you strike." The lesson is clear. The enemy's weapon is a mechanical failure. It is a desperate tool for a desperate army. The American M1 Garand and the BR are superior instruments of precision. The terrifying sound is just bluster, psychological warfare designed to scare the weak. And these men are not weak. Miller walks out of the hut into the blinding sunlight, feeling invincible. He trusts his training. He trusts his officers. He has been inoculated against fear by a projector screen in Georgia. He has no idea that the film was a calculated lie, a desperate attempt by high command to prevent mass panic before his boots even touched French soil. June 6, 1944. 06:28 a.m., approaching Omaha Beach, Sector Dog Green. 7 months later, the heat of Georgia is a distant memory, replaced by the freezing salt spray hell of the English Channel. The steel ramp of the LCVP, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, rattles violently against the waves. Miller is packed in shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men from the 29th Infantry Division. The smell here isn't tobacco, it is diesel fumes, vomit, and the metallic tang of sheer terror. The shoreline is a grey smudge in the distance, obscured by smoke. The naval bombardment has stopped, leaving an eerie, ringing silence that hangs over the water for a split second. Miller grips his M1 Garand. His knuckles are white. He runs through the checklist in his mind. Get off the boat. Find cover. Locate the enemy. Fire. He remembers the film. Bark worse than bite. 30 seconds, the coxswain screams from the rear of the boat. Miller looks at the bluffs rising above the beach. They look silent. Maybe the bombers got them. Maybe the Germans have already retreated. He prepares himself for the sound of rifle fire, for the slow thud of enemy guns. He is ready for a fight, he understands. The boat grounds with a sickening crunch of sand against steel. The heavy ramp unlatches and begins to drop into the surf. Go, go, go. The first 3 men in Miller's squad surge forward into the waist-deep water. Then, the air rips open. It isn't a thump-thump-thump. It isn't the sound of a gun at all. It is a continuous tearing sound, like a giant sheet of canvas being ripped in half by a god. Zip! The water around the ramp erupts into a violent froth of white geysers. The 3 men in front of Miller don't fall. They are physically shredded, thrown backward into the hull by the kinetic energy of a dozen bullets hitting them in a fraction of a second. Miller freezes. His brain cannot process the sound. It contradicts everything he was told. This isn't an inaccurate spray. This is a laser beam of lead. 2 more machine guns open up from the bluffs. Crossfire. The sound is deafening, a triangular intersection of buzzing death. Zzz. There is no overheating. There is no pause for a barrel change. There is only the slaughter. Miller dives over the side of the boat, plunging into the bloody, freezing water. The salt burns his eyes, but the realization burns his mind hotter. They lied. The training film was wrong. The MG42 wasn't a failure. It was the most efficient killing machine ever built, and he was walking straight into its teeth. June 14, 1944, near St. Lo, Normandy. The beach was a slaughterhouse, but the hedgerows are a tomb. 8 days have passed since Private Miller scrambled up the shingle at Omaha. He is no longer the clean-shaven boy from Topeka. His uniform is stiff with dried mud and salt. His eyes are sunken into dark hollows, and his hands tremble, a subtle, rhythmic shaking that only stops when he grips his rifle. The 29th Infantry Division has pushed inland, but pushed is a generous word. They are clawing for every inch. Miller crouches behind an earthen embankment topped with thick, ancient hawthorn roots. This is the bocage. To a map planner in London, these were just lines on paper. To Miller, they are 40-foot walls of vegetation that turn every farm field into a medieval fortress. "Move up," his sergeant whispers. Sergeant Kowalski is a replacement too. The original squad leader died on Dog Green. Miller swallows dryly. The silence in the Norman countryside is heavy, broken only by the buzzing of flies over the swollen carcass of a cow in the next field. It is a deceptive tranquility. They are hunting a ghost. For 3 hours, a single German machine gun team has pinned down their entire platoon, halting the advance of 200 men. In the training film, the narrator had mocked the MG42's excessive vibration, claiming it sprayed bullets wildly. Miller now knows this inaccuracy is actually a terrifying tactical feature. The Germans call it the beaten zone. The weapon doesn't need to snipe a man through the heart. It simply needs to fill a specific cubic volume of air with so much lead that biology becomes physics. Anything entering that space ceases to exist. "I think he's reloading," Kowalski whispers, eyes scanning the dense greenery across the field, about 150 yards away. "I haven't heard a burst in 2 minutes. Miller remembers the film again. The gun overheats rapidly. While the German is changing his melted barrel, that is when you strike. It is the glimmer of hope they are trained to look for. "Go," Kowalski signals. Miller and 3 others rise from the safety of the ditch. They sprint into the open field, boots pounding the soft earth, racing toward the cover of an apple tree midway across. For 4 seconds, there is only the sound of their breathing and the thud of boots. Then, the tearing sound returns. Zip! It happens faster than human reaction time allows. The ground around Miller's feet erupts as if invisible jackhammers are tearing up the soil. The air snaps violently, the sonic cracks of bullets passing inches from his ears, merging into a single high-pitched scream. Miller dives face first into a shallow depression, pressing his helmet into the dirt. To his left, Private Harrison isn't as lucky. There is a wet thud, and Harrison drops mid-stride, his leg nearly severed by a burst that acted like a scythe. Miller screams for a medic, but his voice is drowned out. The German gunner isn't just firing, he is traversing. He is sweeping the field back and forth with a horrifying mechanical precision. Lying in the dirt, Miller realizes the second lie of Fort Benning. The training films depicted the barrel change as a clumsy, arduous process involving heavy asbestos mitts and jammed mechanics. It was supposed to take the enemy precious time. But the German gun crew behind that hedge is a well-oiled machine. The gunner had simply flipped a latch on the side of the weapon's shroud, the red-hot barrel had popped out, and his assistant had slotted a cool one in. Clack, clack, 3 to 4 seconds. That was it. By the time Miller had stood up, the weapon was already operational again. The window of opportunity was a myth. Pinned in the depression, Miller watches the grass above his head get shredded. The rate of fire is so high, 1,200 rounds per minute, that he can't distinguish individual shots. It is a suppressed, continuous roar. This creates a psychological paralysis known to the commanders as suppressive shock. When an American .30 caliber fires thump, 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 a soldier feels he might be able to time a dash between rounds. He feels he has a chance. With the MG42, there is no gap. There is no rhythm. There is only a wall of noise that triggers a primal reptilian instinct to freeze. You don't want to fight back. You want to dig a hole and disappear. "We can't move!" Miller yells back to the hedgerow, his voice cracking. "We can't get our heads up!" Behind the German gun, the Schütze, gunner, adjusts his grip. He is not panicking. He is not fighting with a vibrating, inaccurate piece of junk. He is pulsing the trigger in controlled half-second bursts, Bart, Bart, sending 20 bullets down range with each touch. He is using the MG42 exactly as it was designed, to pin the enemy in place so the mortars can finish them off. Miller hears the distant thump of a German mortar tube leaving the barrel. He presses his face into the mud, the taste of copper in his mouth, realizing that the weapon barking at him isn't just a gun. It is the anchor of the entire German defensive strategy, and he has no idea how to kill it. June 14th, 1944. 14:10 p.m. The same field near St. Lo. The earth heaves. The German mortar shell lands 20 yards behind Miller, not close enough to kill, but close enough to rattle the fillings in his teeth. A geyser of black loam and shredded roots sprays over him, pattering against his helmet like heavy rain. For a moment, the world is a concussive blur. A high-pitched ringing drowns out the terrifying zip of the machine gun. Miller gasps for air, choking on the acrid, sulfurous smoke that has rolled into his depression in the ground. "Miller, get your goddamn head up!" The voice cuts through the ringing. It's Sergeant Kowalski, screaming from the ditch behind him. Miller looks back, eyes wide, paralyzed by the instinct to stay small. "They'll cut us apart!" he screams back. "We have to wait for the barrel change." "There ain't gonna be a barrel change, kid," Kowalski roars, his face smeared with grease and sweat. "If you wait, you die. Fire at the flash. Keep him busy." It is the moment the training film dies and the veteran is born. The doctrine taught at Fort Benning, precision, patience, waiting for the mechanical failure, is useless here. The German weapon is superior, but the American army has something the Germans don't: ammo. Endless, inexhaustible amounts of ammunition. Miller rolls onto his side. He can't see the German gunner. He can only see the violently shaking bush where the muzzle flash is strobing like a fiery strobe light. He raises his M1 Garand over the lip of the dirt divot. He doesn't aim. He simply points. Bang, bang, bang. The semi-automatic action of the Garand kicks against his shoulder. 8 rounds in 4 seconds. Ping! The clip ejects with a metallic chime. He jams another one in. Click, clack. To his left, 2 other riflemen join in. They aren't trying to hit the German gunner between the eyes. They are simply pouring volume into the hedgerow. They are creating a wall of lead to answer the buzzsaw. Suddenly, the tone of the battle shifts. The continuous zzz-zeep of the MG42 falters. It stops. Not because the gun overheated, not because the barrel melted, but because the German gunner, terrifying as he is human. When 50 rounds of American .30-06 caliber fire start shredding the leaves inches from his face, self-preservation kicks in. He ducks. "O'Malley, take the left! Move! Move!" Kowalski bellows. This is the new reality of the Normandy campaign. It is a brutal game of fire and maneuver. While the riflemen suppress the German gun, wasting ammo by the boxload to keep the enemy's head down, the specialist moves in. Private Red O'Malley, a burly dock worker from Boston, scrambles up the left flank of the field. He is carrying the Browning automatic rifle, Bar. It fires much slower than the MG42, a rhythmic chug-chug-chug, and holds only 20 rounds. The Germans laugh at it. They call it a toy compared to their belt-fed monsters. But the Bar has one advantage. O'Malley can fire it from the shoulder while walking. Miller reloads again, his fingers fumbling with the clip. He fires another 8 rounds into the green wall. "Covering!" he screams, his voice raw. The German gunner pops up again, unleashing a short, angry burst that decapitates a dandelion inches from Miller's nose. But the German is distracted. He is focused on Miller and the riflemen in the center. He has lost track of the flanks. O'Malley reaches the edge of the hedgerow, perpendicular to the German position. He is less than 30 yards away now. He braces the heavy bar against a fence post. Miller stops firing to reload. In the brief silence, he hears the deeper, throatier roar of the bar. Chug, 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 chug. O'Malley dumps an entire magazine directly down the length of the German trench. The high-velocity rounds punch through the dirt, through the roots, and through the men hiding behind them. There is a scream, not a command, but a cry of pain. And then silence. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Kowalski yells. The silence that follows is heavier than the noise. The birds do not sing. The wind rustles the torn leaves of the apple orchard. Miller stands up slowly. His legs feel like jelly. He checks his ammo belt. He has fired 60 rounds in less than 3 minutes, more than he fired in all of basic training. The squad moves forward, warily crossing the open ground that was a death trap moments ago. They reach the German position, a dugout reinforced with logs and sandbags, cleverly hidden at the base of the hedge. Miller looks down into the hole. The MG42 sits on its bipod, looking impossibly sleek and futuristic compared to their wood-stocked rifles. A pile of brass casings, perhaps 500 of them, glitters on the floor of the dugout. The German gunner is slumped over the weapon. He is young, maybe younger than Miller. Beside him lies the melted barrel the training films warned about. It sits in a metal carrier, perfectly functional. Next to it are 3 more spare barrels. They had enough spare parts to keep firing for a week. Kowalski spits a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. He looks at the gun, then at Miller. "Bark worse than its bite, huh?" the sergeant mutters, kicking the steel leg of the tripod. "If we'd waited for that thing to overheat, we'd all be fertilizer." Miller stares at the weapon. He reaches out and touches the cooling jacket. It is still radiating heat, a dormant dragon. He realizes then that the war will not be won by the clever tricks taught in the classrooms of Georgia. It will be won by brute force, by volume, and by learning the hard way that the enemy is not a caricature. He looks at the dead gunner, then back at his squad. They are breathing hard, alive only because they ignored the manual. "Grab their ammo," Kowalski orders, turning back to the map. "We've got another hedgerow in 200 yards. Miller nods. He slings his rifle. The fear is still there, cold in his gut, but the illusion is gone. He knows the truth now. The buzzsaw can be stopped, but the price is ammunition, adrenaline, and blood. December 24th, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 6 months later, the suffocating heat of the Normandy hedgerows has been traded for the bone-crushing cold of the Ardennes. Staff Sergeant Eddie Miller sits in a foxhole that he hacked out of the frozen earth with an entrenching tool. He is 20 years old now, but his face belongs to a man of 40. The 1,000-yard stare isn't a metaphor. It is the default setting of his eyes. Beside him sits a replacement, Private Baker. The kid is fresh from the States, shivering violently in a coat that seems 2 sizes too big. He clutches his rifle like a talisman. "Sarge," Baker whispers, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "Is it true what they say about the German guns? They say they freeze up in this weather. They say the oil gets too thick." Miller looks at the kid. He hears the echo of the narrator from the training hut in Georgia. Overheats rapidly. Inaccurate. Bark worse than bite. Now the lie has mutated. Freezes in the cold. Before Miller can answer, the silence of the Christmas Eve forest is shattered. From the ridgeline 300 yards away, the familiar tearing sound erupts. Zzz, zip! The tracers streak through the twilight like angry hornets, glowing green against the blue-white snow. They slash through the pine trees above their heads, sending showers of splintered wood and pine needles raining down into the foxhole. Baker gasps, curling into a ball at the bottom of the hole. "Jesus, what is that? It sounds like canvas tearing." "It's the saw," Miller says, his voice flat. He doesn't flinch. He checks the action on his M1. "And it doesn't freeze, kid. That oil is fine." The MG42 on the ridge is laying down grazing fire, shooting just knee-high across the flat expanse of snow. It is an invisible tripwire of death. Any man who tries to stand up and run will be cut in half at the thighs. But Miller is no longer the terrified private on Omaha Beach. He doesn't wait for a barrel change. He doesn't pray for a jam. "Get on the radio," Miller orders, calm amidst the chaos. "Call it in. Grid 4482. Airburst." Baker fumbles with the radio handset, his hands shaking. But shouldn't we return fire?" "Not yet," Miller says. "You can't fight a buzzsaw with a rifle from this distance. You fight it with math." Minutes later, the distant thump of American 105mm howitzers answers the call. The shells whistle overhead, but they don't impact the ground. They are set with variable time fuses, the proximity fuses that the Germans are just beginning to fear. Crack, crack. The shells detonate 20 feet above the German ridgeline. Shrapnel rains down vertically, bypassing the cover of the German foxholes. The tearing sound of the MG42 cuts out instantly. Miller stands up, peering over the edge of the hole. "Now," he says, "now we move." They advance up the hill, snow crunching under their boots. When they reach the German position, the scene is grimly familiar. The gun crew is dead. The MG42 sits there, steaming in the cold air, a masterpiece of stamped steel engineering. Miller picks up a handful of snow and scrubs his face. He looks at the weapon that has haunted his dreams from the beaches of France to the forests of Belgium. He realizes that the Army's lie had a purpose, perhaps. If they had known the truth, that they were facing the best machine gun in history, maybe they never would have gotten off the boat. But the lie ultimately failed. It wasn't the failure of the German weapon that saved them. It was the adaptability of the American soldier. Years later, after the surrender, the U.S. Army would quietly admit the truth. They would take the captured MG42s back to the Aberdeen Proving Ground. They would dissect them, study the roller-locked bolt, and marvel at the feed mechanism. And when the United States developed its next generation of machine guns, the M60, they wouldn't look to the slow-firing Browning for inspiration. They would look to the Buzzsaw. The failed German design would become the blueprint for the standard machine guns of NATO for the next 40 years. Miller looks at Baker, who is staring at the German gun with wide, terrified eyes. "It barked pretty loud, didn't it, Sarge?" the kid asks. Miller lights a cigarette, cupping the flame against the wind. "Yeah," Miller says, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "But the bite was real enough."